Clark, and I am here with my friend Bobby Hood. We're on the air to talk all things college, and we do this regularly, so I'm sure you've seen our faces. But today we thought we would get back to basics and talk about SAT and ACT testing. As we know, life is shifting a lot when it comes to the test. So, Bobby, let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing out there as far as the changes going on and what do parents just need to know, especially if they're just walking into, this idea of what do I need to do with SAT and ACT testing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad to, that we're doing this again. We did talk, seems like almost 2 years ago, the first time about SAT and ACT, and it's good to revisit because if you're just starting out now, things have changed a lot now in the past year or two, even just in that short time, right? And so uh I guess the first thing is probably a lot of people have heard that a lot of schools have gone test optional in the past year. And so it would be really easy to be thinking, do I need to even think about the SAT and ACT anymore? Has that just gone away, right?
Yeah, and I keep hearing, I do hear the chatter out there for sure, where parents are like,
Mhm.
I just don't even understand what that means. Yeah, so tell us the basics. What do we need to know?
Yeah. So, people have for years and years have criticized standardized tests, and I agree. Agree with that position. I think that standardized tests are not well designed. They're not a good representation of where students are. And I think that's part of why, there's been that long time feeling about it. And so in the past year and a half, the first thing that happened was that the entire University of California system has announced that they're going test optional or test blind, that they just don't care about the SAT or ACT anymore. And they said that they are designing their own test that's going to replace it, that is going to be a test that you take if you want to go to any school in the University of California system. But nothing has happened on that, so we don't know, right? So after they went test optional and test blind and things like that, a lot of colleges, because of COVID, went test optional as well for the year of seniors that are graduating this year, the 2021 seniors. Some schools have gone test optional or test blind for both this year and next year, 2021 and 2022. Some schools have not put an end date on it, right? And so you have to know, like, okay, what's the difference between those things? What is the difference between test optional and test blind?
So before we do that, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about why they felt they needed to go test
Mhm.
optional or test blind. I mean, is it because just purely they can't get kids in seats at the schools to make this happen, or what else is it? Do they need to know?
Oh yeah. So I think the the reason I think the University of California system did it is that they just believe that the SAT and ACT aren't a good predictor of college success, and that's to a wide extent true, that they don't correlate that well with college success. High school GPA is what correlates with college success, particularly if your GPA in the last 2 years, junior and senior year, if it is increasing, if you're taking harder classes and you're doing better, then that is a predictor of success in college. If it's going down in your last 2 years, that is a predictor of lack of success in college, right? And so that's why colleges have, decided to focus on that. But then you add in the COVID situation last year, and so it became very clear that not all the students were going to be able to take the SAT or ACT, and certainly not as many times as they might need to get the score they want or whatever. And particularly the students who are less likely to be able to take it are students from disadvantaged economic backgrounds. And so it just seemed completely unfair to, like, basically have a system where only people who could afford to drive to a city that doesn't have a COVID shutdown or whatever, right? Or to register for the SAT 5 times or that sort of thing, right? And so a lot of schools just went ahead and went test optional, if that
Got
makes sense.
it. Got it. Hey, and for the viewers, if you're watching now, feel free to put questions into the chat.
For
If you're
sure.
watching it later, please put questions in the comments. Bobby and I are happy to answer any questions that you have. And if we can't answer them, we will get you to the right person. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, give us questions. And if you want, you can always contact us and we'll talk about that at the end. You can contact either of us with questions anytime you like through our websites. Always love to hear from people. And so that's great. Yeah. So real quickly, I just want to say, the whole test optional and test blind thing, right? So test blind is schools that will not look at an SAT or ACT score. If you send it in, they will ignore it. They will delete it, right? So that's like, if you have, this is something to really consider, right? If you've got a great high school GPA and transcript and you're not doing so well on the standardized tests, you might consider applying to a test blind school, right? Other schools almost all schools that did this did a test optional deal, not a test blind situation. Test optional means you can submit SAT and ACT scores, or you can choose not to submit them. And so basically, they are evaluating one pool of applicants with SAT and ACT scores, another pool of applicants without SAT and ACT scores. And then as a result, they promise that the students who don't submit SAT and ACT scores will be evaluated only based on the other considerations, which should be transcript, GPA, recommendation letters, activities, essays that you submit, and all that. The thing to watch out for if you are applying to colleges is that some of these test optional schools, if you look at kind of the fine print on their website, they might say we are test optional for admissions, but actually we are not test optional when it comes to awarding merit aid. So if you want a scholarship, they might actually look at tests, right? And that's a whole different ballgame, because a lot of the reasons people care about the SAT and ACT scores is not just to get into college, but to get into a college that is affordable for you, as in a college where you can get some merit aid, right? And so also you might see colleges that say, we are test optional for admissions, but we actually do require an SAT or ACT score if you want to enroll in the engineering school or the accounting department or the business school or, a science program or whatever. And so you really have to make sure and look. And so the upshot is, unless you are very confident that you're not going to need it and that you're going to apply to test optional schools, right, you probably still need to take the SAT or ACT. Right.
Right. And I put that into the chat so that people that are looking at this afterwards can see those notes. And I want to make sure that I have them right, Bobby. But, that's huge information to know, especially when you're talking about trying to get scholarship dollars. I mean, I know,
sure.
Yeah, both of my boys, based on their scores, got aid and got those merit and scholarship. So as you know, because you coached Chris through his SAT and got an extra 2 points. And just knowing in this environment, that's still a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. And these things I'm saying are based on like what it was like for this year's admissions. And I am sure that, around April, May, when colleges announce their new admissions policies for 2020, the 2022 graduates, we'll probably see a lot of changes and they'll probably get a lot more clear. It's possible, I think it is likely that once the pandemic has sort of gotten under control and is no longer a part of our daily lives, I think a lot of schools will rescind their test optional policies. But we really don't know. This could be part of a movement where 10 years from now, that SAT and ACT are not a thing anymore. That's possible. And I would support that. But like, for anybody who has children that are, students that are, I'd say 13 years or old or older, the SAT and ACT are going to be part of your experience for sure still, right? They're not going to go away that quickly. And so that's it. And so then that comes to, what do you do? How do you prepare? What should a student do? Right. And when should you start and all those things? And that's what we want to just talk about, the basics of that a little bit today. And then of course you can, ask us questions anytime in the future. So you want to just start with that? So when did you like start thinking about college with your first student? At what point did you realize, okay, we have to really like start thinking about this?
Okay, so I was sitting at a baseball game watching my kiddo play baseball, right?
Uh,
And another mom looked over at me and she said, "Hey, have you signed Chris up for SAT and ACT?" And I was like, "What?
mhm.
What don't I know?" Again, and I
Right.
talk about this a lot where where all of a sudden the swirl started where it was like, "Oh my gosh, my hair's
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing, and my kid's gonna be a failure because I'm a failure." And, you
Right.
know, all those parenting,
Yeah.
feelings overwhelm you. And I couldn't even tell you when that was, Bobby. I mean, it was
Uh-huh.
just that, so at the
Right.
time I wasn't working with college students, so I didn't have a clue,
Sure. Yeah, and
right?
see, I think this happens to so many parents, which is like you're just cruising along and you just kind of assume somebody's going to tell you when it's time, right?
Mhm.
And then you start hearing other parents saying all these things, and you're like, oh gosh, everybody's been doing all this stuff, and that's the that's not true, but everybody makes you feel that way with the way they talk, right?
Yeah, and let's be clear,
Mhm.
at school, they are telling the kids this
Mhm.
timeline, they're helping them out with, "Here's what you need to do." I have boys,
Right.
nothing against boys, but they're not usually, hugely communicative.
Sure, they're
Uh,
not coming home and saying, here's every single thing they told me in school today, right?
right. So, some families, they're getting a little bit more information from their kiddo too.
Right.
But I know from talking to lots of parents that a lot of people were in that same boat where they're like, "Oh, yeah, what do I do?"
Absolutely. I mean, it is 100% a universal situation because with all the parents who contact me, they always say, we don't know what we're doing. We just discovered we need to do this. We feel like we're too late. And, also they say, and, the thing is about my student is they're just not a very good test taker, right? Every single parent says that because nobody's a good test taker because that's the whole thing. These tests are designed to not do well so that you have to take them again. And that's a kind of a cynical attitude, but the college board is a for profit. They make money, right? They are a revenue producing entity. So is ACT. They want to make money and have large market share, and they want people to take their tests over and over, and that's how they're designed
Well,
it.
and you think about it though, Bobby, over the years, I know when I took the ACT up in
Mhm.
Iowa, and the SAT wasn't at play because I went to the University of Iowa and they didn't require it.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a one and done deal.
Yeah.
There wasn't,
Oh yeah.
well, or at least that's what I thought. I have no idea now that I say it
Mhm.
out loud if that was an extra option, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is today to go,
Yeah.
well, let me take it again. Well, let me take it
Yes.
again. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, the fact that I absolutely was the kid that's saying, "I'm not good at taking tests," right?
Absolutely. And yeah, for our age group, like students were all like almost everybody I knew, back in 1989 when I graduated high school. I mean, everybody, almost everybody I knew took it only one time. I was the
Mhm.
weirdo who took it multiple times, right? And that's only because I was getting a near perfect score, and so I was like trying to get a perfect score or whatever. The So yeah, so the answer is that it would be really nice to have an SAT or ACT score in hand that you'd be satisfied with and happy to apply to college with. If you could have that by June of your junior year, that would be great, right?
Okay, so say
And
that one more time. You
so
want
June, like the end of your junior year, right? Because that way you can spend the summer after junior year going and visiting some colleges, making some plans to apply. Of course, all of this got thrown out the window last year, but that was part of the thing, like it'd be nice to have the score by June. So you probably ought to plan ahead and not start in May, right? So you should start sometime during junior year and start preparing for the SAT or the ACT. And so that could mean February or March or January of junior year. It could mean winter break during junior year. It could mean the fall during junior year. It could even mean the summer before, so the summer between sophomore and junior year. Those are all good times to start, right? Uh, it can depend a little bit on whether you've taken Algebra 2 yet, right? If you're taking Algebra 2 during junior year, then you won't really know all the math that you need for the SAT and ACT until you finish Algebra 2. So you probably aren't going to at least get the score you want until, you might not get the score you want until the end of junior year. But if you've already taken Algebra 2 before junior year, then you're ready whenever you want. So you could do the summer before junior year or whatever. And so that's part of the idea, is start whenever you can, spend a few weeks and really focus on it and just get prepared. And then once you're prepared, you can continue practicing, but you don't need to be doing intensive work anymore, right? So you take a few weeks or a month where you are, probably spending 5 hours a week, maybe, working on it, right? So that's why it's good to do it during winter break or something like that. And then once you've gotten to a score that you're happy with, then you can once a week maybe spend 1 hour a week just continuing to practice. So I think you can
practicing on the areas that you need to, like, how do you know which section or what to study?
Yeah. So what I do with my tutoring students is I say, okay, let's learn all the strategies for each of the sections. So like for the ACT, you have 4 different sections: English, math, reading, science, and say, okay, let's learn these strategies, practice that on the reading and science sections, learn these math strategies, practice that on a math section. And then once you're seeing scores like that, you have improved in all the sections, you feel like you've kind of plateaued and you're getting a score, and you say, okay, I'd be happy with this score. What you can do at that point is just each week, because the test takes about 3 hours to take, 3 hours and 15 minutes. So instead of sitting down and taking a 3-hour test all the time, right, you could just take one section each week, spend about an hour, take a math section this week, next week, take an English section. The week after that, take a reading and a science section because they're short. That's about an hour and 10 minutes. And so just trade off on that. And so then your scores will maintain at whatever level they're at, or they will improve naturally through practice, right? And so it's just like playing a sport or something, right? You, at first, like let's say you were learning to be a golfer, right? You learn how to hold the club and you try to learn how to swing the club or whatever. And you have to swing it 1,000 times to get that muscle memory, right?
Okay, I'm going to tell you this, Bobby.
Yep.
I listen to you talking, and I'm all about efficiency, right? Yeah. That's how I'm built.
Right.
How do we do this more efficiently? Because that sounds like a lot of work. And I will tell you, as a mom, it sounds like a lot of work to get my kid to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think this is the thing. So if you think about a student who is, playing a sport or in band or something like that, they understand that you need to do a certain amount of work to initially get muscle memory, right? So for me, I mean, that seems to me like it's about 10 to 15 maybe hours of work total needed to get that muscle memory, right? And once you've done that, you just have to do it to create the muscle memory. So then when you see a question, you see a math question and it says, it's talking about averages, and you say, okay, here's how I do averages. I do this thing. It talks about probability. You write down probability equals what you want over total, and you just methodically solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Once you've got those skills in there, which maybe takes for each section, 3 to 4 hours of work per section, right? Of like taking 3 or 4 tests using the strategies, right? Once you've done that, then it's muscle memory and it's there and it will stay as long as, just as if you were a golfer, a tennis player or whatever, you got to do a little bit of practice every week to remember how to do it, or you're going to get rusty, right? So that's why 1 hour a week, switch between the sections, and that's it. And so go ahead.
How do you know where you should be spending your time? So let's say, I've got kids that, one kid that was not good at math, didn't enjoy it, hated it. Does he spend his time there, or does he spend his time on the areas where he's really good?
So this is really the most important question, and a really, really fascinating question, because so if you're on the SAT, right? If you're taking the SAT and let's say, okay, you are getting a 500 on math, so right at the median, right? But a 600 on verbal, right? So that adds up to an 1,100. Well, you can keep increasing your verbal, right? So you can get a 700 on verbal. Okay. But you still have that 500 on math. So 700 plus 500 is a 1200 score, and that's a good score. But you're not going to be able to get, say, if you need a 1250 or a 1300, you're probably going to need to get that math up, right?
Got it.
But now think about the ACT, because the SAT, the score is you add math plus verbal. The ACT has 4 sections: English, math, reading, science, and you average the 4 scores together, right? So I have so many students who are in this position. They take their first practice test and they have a 22 math and then a 26 English, reading, science. And I say, okay, well, you could probably get that English, reading, and science to a 30 or maybe even higher, right? With the right strategies, if you're starting at a 26. But if you have a 22 math, you're very, very unlikely to get that math to a 30. You might be able to get to a 26, right? But so think about if you need a 28 or something like that, right? 3 30s and a 25 averaged together, that's a 28 score, right? Maybe even a 29, right? And so you can absolutely get to your goal on the ACT by maximizing the areas you're good at and not worrying so much about the other section. You can just maximize the other 3 areas. And so if you're strong in the verbal side, that's 3/4 really of the test. People would think that it's not, because the science section, they think that that's like math, but it is not. English, reading, and science are all verbal. They're all just reading. They're all variants of reading and grammar. And
Yeah,
so
so I'm going to say that in a different way. I think number
Yeah.
one, I think you explained it great, and I love that, because that's a big thing to know.
Yeah.
But this goes right along with all my strengths work, right? And that is
Mhm.
do what you do well. Because you're gonna
Absolutely.
enjoy it. A lot more. In the case of a test, it's going to be a little bit less tedious, right? Because at least you feel like you've got a fighting chance,
Right.
because you're good at it. So it's really about that. I love that with an ACT that you can kind of have a different strategy walking in, which is interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is really fascinating because I learned this, over my 10-year tutoring career. One of the things I only figured out, I'm always refining things and making things a little more efficient. One of the things I figured out in the last couple of years is, instead of saying your assignment after today's session is take another math section, right? I want you to do this one thing. I have now switched with most students to saying, here are the options for things you could do. And here's kind of an order of priority, but like math would be good. But if you're feeling like reading and science, take reading and science. Or if you're feeling like English, take English. Do the thing that you feel like doing. At some point, you need to take all of it. But if you feel today like I'd really like to take a reading section and I really don't want to take a math section, then great, take a reading section, because improving on any section improves your score, right? So that's the thing. And so that's where it really all comes down to, like, the efficiency. And this is what's so interesting with your work in helping students identify their strengths, right? Even talking to you has improved the way I tutor a lot, because learning about my own strengths and learning about how the students can maximize their strengths really does help, because I have changed. That's part of it, changed in my tutoring to say, okay, like if a student really hates math, and I say, well, let's go ahead and get your reading and science scores up a whole bunch. Let's get your English score up a whole bunch. And let's just worry about math later. And then the student feels so much more confident. They say, okay, I do have these skills. I can see big improvements, and I don't need to worry about math. Look at how high these other scores are. Even if math never changes, right? It's going to be fine.
Yeah. I love
And
that.
so that changes everything, because it is like, of course, I say this all the time, but the goal of test prep is to increase student scores on tests. But the other really big goal is to improve students' confidence in their own abilities, and to recognize that with what they already know, I don't need to teach them any new concepts. With what they already know, they can get a score that represents their own abilities really well. Right? Because the whole
Right.
thing is, if you've got A's in all your classes, then you are supposed to have a really high SAT or ACT score, but then you take the test and it's not as high, right? If you've got A's and B's, then you're supposed to have a pretty darn good SAT or ACT score, but then you take the test and you don't get that score. And then you feel like, oh, I guess I'm not so good at this, even though my classwork says I am. And if you're not careful, you could believe that, right? And so,
Oh, for sure. And I'll tell
right.
you, of course, we know at teenagers and at the age they're at and the exploration that they're doing just to figure out who they are, it's
Mhm.
hugely important that they're not feeling in that failure mode versus feeling like, yeah, I've got this. I'm in control. I mean, it's just such a big part of this.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah. And
why
so,
we send
oh,
people
go
to
ahead.
you to coach, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
because we want them to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to, because like, people can, of course, just ask any of us questions anytime, and I can talk in detail, and you can find on my website lots of details about how this works. But kind of to like wrap up this idea for the parents who are listening to this, and for the students who are listening to this, a lot of times people think that preparing for the SAT and ACT is about doing hours and hours and hours of tedious work. And I have parents say to me, I'm going to tell my student that they need to do 4 hours of work every day for the next 3 weeks or whatever. And I say, no, do not do that. It's about quality preparation, which is you need to learn strategies and then you need to apply them and get muscle memory. And so in tutoring, it takes me 4 hours, maybe 5 hours or so of talking to the student to convey all the strategies you need to score, in the top 2%, above 1450, above 31 on the ACT or, on the SAT or ACT. And so you could also get strategies like that by buying the Princeton Review books for the SAT or ACT. I think they're now called Premium Prep SAT and Premium Prep ACT. They used to be called Cracking the SAT and ACT. They just renamed them. But you could just read those books, or you can tutor with me, and I spend about 5 hours typically with a lot of my students because it's just convey that information, and either they're already seeing this enormous score jump, or they have all the information stored in PDF files from our sessions, and they can keep reviewing it and practicing it, and they'll eventually get to that score, and I can keep working with them over email or whatever, and so that's the thing. But the important thing for parents to know is you need strategies, and the strategies in the Princeton Review books are great. The strategies I teach are great. Going to a free site like, say, like the really popular Khan Academy site, it is great for if you don't know a concept and you want to learn a concept. It's great for that. If you need to know the rules of circles or trigonometry, Khan Academy is amazing and wonderful free resource for that. But it does not teach actual test taking strategies. It teaches concepts, and it will not lead to the kinds of improvements that we're talking about that I see with my students, where they see, 3-point improvements on the ACT, or 100 to 200 points on the SAT very quickly, and often much higher improvements, because you just need to know how to manage your time on the test, how to be calm, how to be methodical, how to use your own skills to the best of your abilities.
And I'd say on that point, Bobby, and then we can wrap up, that,
Yeah.
you have to also know your student and how they're going to learn
Mhm.
best. Handing a book to my youngest, wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened. He would have been like, yeah, I'll get to that when I get to it. My older,
Absolutely.
he would have done the work. So you
Yeah.
got to know your own kid too, but know that the resources are out there. Bobby, can help with the strategy and walking them through that. That would be my preference for myself.
Mhm.
Just meaning for me, if I had to go through it these days, because that's how I learn better. So, you got to know your own kiddo.
Absolutely. And just for anyone who is watching, you can always send me a contact email through my website. You can ask me questions, and I'll even like send you a practice test if you just want to take a practice test at home, because this is one other just piece of thing to mention. A lot of parents call me and say, well, our plan is we're going to send our student off to take the ACT. We'll see what the score is, and then we'll decide if we want tutoring. And my response is always, why would you make your kid get up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday to go get a score that is not the score they want, right? I can provide you with an actual real ACT that you can take at home. And as long as you use as long as you follow the, time limits, it'll be the same score you would have gotten if you had taken that in the real setting. You don't need to go take the test for real to see what your score might be. So that's important. And And I even have an app on the App Store. Have I ever talked about that before? I have an app
I
where
don't think so.
students can download it. Yeah, I made it a couple of years ago, where my voice is the proctor for your SAT and ACT. So it's just called ACT Test Proctor and SAT Test Proctor from Bobby Hood Online Tutoring. And so you can listen. So I can either read the full proctoring instructions, which of course takes like 10 minutes and is so boring, but you can also select an option where I just give you some test strategy advice. So I say, okay, you're about to start the reading section. Maybe skip around on the passages a little bit. You don't need to read in detail up front. Skip around on the questions, do the questions easier first. And now, take a deep breath, close your eyes for a second, go to a happy place, and now pick up your pencil and begin. And so that's really fun. And so most of my students download that app from the App Store and use that as their proctor to take the test at home. And it's a lot of fun. They seem to enjoy it, as much as, anything can be enjoyed in this environment.
Right. Yeah, I know.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, thank you, because
Oh my gosh, it's so
every
great.
time I hear you talk about this, even though I hear you saying a lot of the same things, I still learn. And, and I got a question from a lady named Megan, and I sent her to you the other day, and
nice.
where, she wanted to know, and even though hearing you, I feel like I know the answer, but I was like, oh gosh, no, I'm going to let me give you to the expert. But thank you so much, because it's always so helpful.
Well, absolutely. And so part of this is, I do tutor students all the time, and anyone around the nation is, I'd love to work with your student if you'd like to, or just answer your questions. But also, like, I had some of my students go through your course last year, Kristen, and I got reports back from them that it really, really helped them on identifying their strengths and trying to figure out their college majors. So I think you've got some courses starting up, right? So
I do. I've got 2 courses starting, the same class, just 2 different classes, called Pick the Right Major. And I limit it to 10 students. And so if that's something, that could benefit your student, please go to my website, kristenclark.com, and you'll find the student coaching section and sign up.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, it's great to get to talk to you again. It's like, my one piece of normalcy in this crazy past year is getting to talk to you sometimes. So this is really, really wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye-bye.